Picture this. We're traveling back to 1883, straight into the Sunda Strait in Indonesia, to reconstruct what is arguably the most terrifying sensory event in human history. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going step by step through a dramatic countdown to an absolute cataclysm. We're talking about the day a mountain literally tore itself apart. The eruption of Krakatoa was a catastrophe of such unimaginable violence that it fundamentally altered our planet's atmosphere, its oceans, and the lives of tens of thousands of people.
Now, to really wrap your head around Krakatoa, you have to understand the sheer, mind-boggling acoustic violence of the event. On August 27th, the volcano didn't just erupt, it detonated. It produced the loudest sound ever recorded in modern history. The pressure wave from this thing was so intense that 40 miles away, sailors on the British ship the RMS Norham Castle literally fell to the deck in absolute agony because the sound shattered their eardrums. And 160 miles away in Batavia, which is modern-day Jakarta, the concussive air wave was bursting windows, cracking solid stone walls, and sending the pressure gauges at the local gasworks completely off the scale.
To put the staggering reach of this blast into perspective, the sound of the mountain ripping itself apart traveled an astonishing 3,110 miles to Perth, Australia. It was even heard 3,000 miles in the exact opposite direction, over on the island of Rodriguez in the Indian Ocean. And the wild thing is, people on those distant shores had no idea they were listening to a volcano. They thought they were hearing heavy, distant cannon fire from some massive naval battle. The acoustic pressure wave from this explosion actually circled the entire globe more than 3.5 times, and it kept registering on barographs for 5 solid days.
But, this apocalypse didn't just happen out of nowhere. The warning signs were all there. The timeline to disaster actually started stirring back on May 20th with these massive visible ash columns. By June 16th, thick black clouds were completely blocking out the sun over the islands. Fast forward to early August, and a Dutch engineer reported a half-meter of ash just blanketing the landscape and destroying all the vegetation. Yet, and this is a seriously chilling twist of human nature, this ominous buildup was largely treated by locals and passing commercial ships as a fun, festive spectacle. Sightseeing ships were literally chartering trips so people could watch the churning black clouds and glowing ash. They were completely unaware they were sailing right over a massive pressure cooker building beneath the sea.
Section 1, August 26th to 27th, the climax.
Well, that party atmosphere evaporated completely on the afternoon of August 26th. The pacing of the eruptions accelerated so rapidly, we're talking explosions ringing out every 10 minutes. A black ash cloud rocketed nearly 17 miles up into the sky. And then, on the morning of August 27th, the sheer incomprehensible scale of the energy released just defied belief. Krakatoa essentially collapsed right into its own emptying magma chamber, and that allowed massive amounts of cold seawater to rush in. The resulting hydrovolcanic explosion released an estimated 200 megatons of TNT equivalent. Just to let that sink in for a second, that is roughly 4 times as powerful as the Tsar Bomba, which is the most powerful nuclear weapon humanity has ever detonated.
It's really easy to just get lost in those massive geological numbers, but we have to remember the actual human horror happening on the ground. A massive pyroclastic flow, which is this superheated avalanche of ash, pumice, and gas moving at over 60 miles per hour, swept right across the water on a cushion of steam. Mrs. Benerick, an eyewitness over on the coast of Sumatra, barely survived the outer edges of this flow. She recounted plunging into this hellish, suffocating pitch darkness, her skin burning from the hot bite of falling pumice as she stumbled blindly through the ash. Entire villages in its path were just instantly incinerated.
But actually, the fire wasn't even the deadliest part. The collapse of the volcano displaced millions of tons of seawater, and that triggered colossal tsunamis. In the coastal town of Merak, the sea simply consumed the land. As this massive black wall of water approached, people frantically scrambled up a steep hill trying to survive. An eyewitness farm worker gave a terrifying account of the visceral panic, a desperate, screaming fight for life, where people tightly wedged together on the hillside literally dragged each other down into the rushing waters in a terrifying death grip.
The sheer scale of these waves is almost impossible to picture in your mind. The largest tsunami reached an estimated height of 135 feet. Ships that were incredibly lucky enough to just be facing the right direction, like the Loudest, were lifted at dizzying, terrifying angles right up over the crest of the wave. The crew of the Loudest could only look back in absolute horror as the sea, in a single sweeping motion, completely erased the town of Teluk Betong. Where a bustling settlement had been just moments before, absolutely nothing remained but open water.
The final official death toll tells a profoundly staggering story. Over 36,000 people lost their lives in this cataclysm. But what's truly terrifying to realize is that over 34,000 of those fatalities were caused not by the explosions or the ash, but directly by the relentless tsunamis that scoured the coastlines of Java and Sumatra. They completely destroyed 165 coastal villages.
Section 2. A planet forever changed. So the immediate sheer violence finally ended by the late afternoon of August 27th, but as the dust slowly began to settle over the decimated Sunda Strait, a new, totally eerie reality set in. The Indian Ocean basically became a macabre graveyard. The eruption generated massive rafts of floating volcanic pumice, and some were so incredibly thick they could actually support the weight of full trees and debris. For months, and even up to a year after the blast, ships reported a haunting, horror movie-like sight. These floating pumice rafts drifting thousands of miles across the ocean, carrying the skeletal remains of Krakatoa's victims all the way to the east coast of Africa.
And the effects extended way, way above the oceans. The volcano injected up to 5 cubic miles of fragmented rock and an enormous volume of sulfur dioxide gas straight up into the stratosphere. That injected gas then combined with high-altitude water vapor to form a veil of sulfuric acid droplets. This highly reflective global layer acted exactly like a planetary filter, bouncing sunlight right back into space. The result? A literal volcanic winter. Average global temperatures dropped by 1.2 degrees Celsius, and the entire planet didn't fully return to its normal climate for 5 years.
But it wasn't just cold, it was visually bizarre. This atmospheric veil produced some of the most surreal optical effects in all of human history. Because the volcanic ash particles were exactly the right size to scatter red light, people all around the globe started reporting seeing blue and green moons. They saw lavender suns, and as the ash spread to higher latitudes, it triggered sunsets that were so intensely, luridly blood red that fire engines in New York, Poughkeepsie, and New Haven were actually called out. The residents literally thought neighboring towns were engulfed in massive fires. It's even believed that this very same volcanic sky is what inspired the famous red background in Edward Munch's painting, The Scream.
Section 3. The Child Awakes.
You'd think a mountain destroying itself would be the end of the story, right? Not quite. Beneath the ocean, the geologic engine was very much still running. In 1927, a brand new threat was born. Fishermen noticed steam rising from the sea, and soon after, a new volcanic cone breached the surface. It was named Krakatoa, which translates to the child of Krakatoa. For decades, it has steadily grown, erupting constantly. And in December 2018, this child proved exactly how dangerous it still is. A large portion of Krakatoa collapsed into the sea during an eruption, generating a deadly tsunami with waves measuring over 260 feet high at the source islands, ultimately killing over 400 people on the nearby coasts.
That 2018 collapse blew away 2/3 of Krakatoa's total volume. But, true to its chaotic nature, the volcano is already rapidly rebuilding itself. It continues to erupt, and it continues to grow, right there in the middle of the Sunda Strait, which leaves us with a lingering, deeply unsettling thought. We know the devastating cycle of this magma chamber. We know the history of its catastrophic collapses. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes open and keep questioning the ground beneath your feet, because the question isn't if, but when will the child finish what the parent started.